God has specifically chosen you to be here at this time and in this place. You have incredible potential, purpose, and calling to push back the darkness and be a light for Christ. Stand for nothing and you'll fall for anything. It's time to stand your ground. This is Unapologetic. Hi everyone, welcome to Unapologetic. I am so excited because today I'm interviewing Morgan Harper Nichols. You have seen her work, if you don't know, at Starbucks, Target, Anthropology, none of which are sponsors of the show, but just so you know who I'm talking to today, she is amazing. She is a musician, she is a wonderful artist, and she is someone that God has absolutely opened doors for her art, her Christian art and inspiration to get out into the world and bless so many people. She's telling us about her journey. She's telling us about what it was like to live undiagnosed with autism for most of her life. And she also is giving us very practical tips for how to live with peace and how to implement peace as a regular practice into our lives. You will be blessed by today's show. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me in welcoming Morgan Harper Nichols to Unapologetic.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited you're here. So we're going to start off asking what I ask everyone. What do you wish Christians would stop apologizing for?
I think I would say stop apologizing for not having everything figured out at once. I think there is a lot of pressure, especially these days because of technology, because now you have this public record of,
Right.
everything you've ever said, everything you've ever done. And I think at times there's a lot of pressure and anxiety about that. It's like, well, I can't be wrong, or I can't mess up. So I think that ends up at times leading to a lot of pride or just a lot of just chaos, honestly. And one thing I've been working on myself is I'm like, how can I incorporate phrases like this into my life, which I believe is very important in a spiritual practice, which is how, I'm going to sit with that for a few weeks and then I'll get back to you. Or I'm going to spend some time thinking about that for the next year. Like I said that to someone the other day, they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I think we need to start doing that more. Like we don't have to just have something to say. Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to need a minute. Maybe you need a year or two or three, tarry with it, sit with it. So that's something I'm really passionate about right now. And I'm practicing myself.
Okay. Can you give some context though to what would be I'd get back with you in a year? We're not talking about conflict with someone.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
There's totally a ton of things in the world where an immediate response is necessary. It's
right.
like if someone says, hey, do you need me to call 911? You should probably answer ASAP.
Right.
But for me, what that looks like is if someone asks me, hey, are you going to create, I used to do a devotional project where I did it was a free daily devotional and it had all this stuff in it. It was so robust. It was before I had a child and I had extra time on a Saturday morning to just put all this together.
Saturday morning.
Yeah. And people ask are you going to bring that back? And I'm like, I don't know yet. And they're like, well, why? I'm like, I don't know. I have so much going on right now. Yeah. And I've even had some people say well, God create had you be able to do that? And I'm like, yeah, in that season. And just because I can't tell you right now if I'm going to continue that,
right.
It doesn't mean that I'm not ever considering that again. So that's just one category that comes up. That comes up a lot for me, I think, because I'm very publicly very creative and I put a lot of things out there. So
we just want more Morgan. Yeah. When can you get this stuff?
Yeah. And I just really want to, especially in our very rushed time, it can feel very countercultural, especially for young people to say what, I thought I wanted to be in ministry in this way, but now I'm like, oh, maybe I need to take some time. Maybe I want to go study under someone for 5 years or 10 years and then get back to this. Like, that should be okay. Like, if you're like 22 and you're like, I want to be a youth pastor, and then all of a sudden after a year of it, you're like, whoa, actually, maybe I'm not ready for the spotlight like I thought I was. Like, I just want to see more of that, more openness around that. Of like, hey, I need some time. Like, I thought I was ready for this, but maybe I'm not. Or I wanted to get into this, but I need a little bit more time. I want to pray about it. I want to sit with it. So, yeah.
I think that some of that that's so true. I wonder if it comes maybe from fear. Like, if I don't make the most out of this opportunity, I'm never going to get it again. And I know we're talking about peace.
That's so
that's the conversation we're getting into. And fear really disrupts peace. Absolutely. I mean, definitely being scared. And we even notice physiologically, like, that's when we're sweating and we're in our fight or flight or freeze. Like, you're not peaceful when you're fearful. And I was just thinking about preparing for our talk, John 16:33, the verse so many of us know, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And so I want us to enter into this conversation about peace, because some people love that conversation. And I've kind of found it to be people that maybe are a little more naturally geared towards peace. But then you have the people that are definitely more fearful, anxious. Like, peace is almost a little bit of a cuss word. Like, they're like, oh gosh, I hope I don't feel convicted about that. Can you just tell us, starting out, why is peace important? Why is it something we need to pursue?
Oh my goodness, yes. It's so important because, as you just kind of spoke to a little bit, it's like it's such an important part of your faith walk, of your spiritual journey, and we see that when you look at the life of Jesus and how in sheer chaos there was still peace, be still. And that wasn't like, there was no Instagram back then. Like, it wasn't like just a little cute little Instagram quote. It was like, this is a way of life that is very challenging. It was then, and it still is now. And it's something that it's important because it reminds us that a faithful walk, it's something that we have to practice pursuing. And I think it can be challenging for a lot of people, including myself, because so much in our world is not about practice. It's about game time. It's about, well, how can how many points did you score? Like, oh, haha, like you got those people, or you told them, or you own them, or whatever it is. It's all about like the scoreboard. And that might sound very vague, but it's like, I'm pretty sure everyone can think about something in their life right now that feels like a scoreboard, whether it's a comment section, which side of the debate has the most likes, or whether it's something in your family, maybe your family values people who have a certain amount of money or status or a certain amount of kids, whatever it is. There's so many things in life where it's all about that. And what peace is something that, is something we can practice. And I think that for even Jesus to say, peace be still in the middle of the storm is a reminder that, okay, this is something that we're not going to be able to just snap our fingers and everything is perfect, but it's something that we can enter into and practice on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's why it's important, because we need those reminders that not everything is meant for us to just figure it all out in 1 second. We're not going to get all the answers right away. We need to practice entering into the presence of God.
Yeah. Okay, so we're just going to enter now into Morgan's peace school. So teach us, teach me, teach the listeners, practically, how do we enter into peace? Or practice it, or however you phrase it.
Oh my goodness. So yes, I've written a lot about peace, and I decided, I wrestled with this for a while, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to go full artist poetic mode on this. And I want to invite people into this, because this is how I have learned how to practice peace in my life. I was diagnosed with autism as an adult, and that's an important part of my story, because for me, finding peace looks like finding room to breathe in daily life. I have a sensory processing disorder also. So even something as simple as fluorescent lights or a lawnmower outside can set me back for hours at times, just from a neurological perspective. Yeah. So I had to learn very, very real time, what does it look like to just find that moment of peace? It's something I have to practice. And what I've found is that we each, because we're all different and we're all unique in our own way, we can look for ways in this beautifully divine created world to remind us to practice peace. So what I invite people to do is I invite you to think of a place in nature that brings you a lot of peace. And you don't have to necessarily be able to go to that place, but think about all of the many layers and complexities of that place. All like whether for you, it might be an ocean shore and it might
it's always the ocean. Unfortunately, I live in Texas, but yes.
Hey, you have some ocean all the way down south.
Well, debatable.
Yes. And for me, it's a river, and it was inspired by the song "It Is Well With My Soul," which says at the beginning, when peace like a river attendeth my way. And I heard that as a kid, and I began to associate peace with the river. And some people might hear that and be like, well, that's not practical. Or is it? When you think about it, do we think God just made rivers and oceans and trees just for aesthetics?
Yeah.
No, it's not just for prettiness and loveliness and beauty that we just pass along the side of the highway onto the next thing. Maybe it is the thing. Maybe we do need to slow down and look closer and say, wow, this random creek behind my house, this random cloud that's sitting above the house, like maybe God has lessons for that in me too, for me too. Yeah. Maybe it's not just for the birds and the dog barking at a storm or whatever. Maybe it's for me too. So that's actually a practical thing that I like to really I'm not normally like a very aggressive person, but that's something I like to push. I like to challenge people on. It's that's like, great. Slow down and listen and see what God is teaching you in the space that you're in the landscape that you're on. There's so much richness there, and that's just a good place to start. And that's how we can start to find peace right here and find ways to practice peace right here.
And the great thing is, what we know more from just the counseling side is you also have the power to sit there and close your eyes and imagine something that you think is beautiful. And actually, your brain doesn't really necessarily know the difference between actually seeing it and imagining it. That can still bring a lot of calmness. A lot of times when I think about it, we would call it grounding, like from a counseling perspective. You're trying to ground yourself. You're upset because of, you mentioned so many people now also are realizing they have sensory processing disorders or struggles. And so figuring out, I know that you know, but just for our listeners, how to calm your mind down and your body down and how much nature has to do with that. And so I'm just kind of thinking about the person that's stressed out at work and they can't go on a nature walk, but knowing that you can sit there and you can envision, and there's a lot of power in doing that. And if you think about scripture, there's so much imagery just in reading Psalms, like you just said, and you can envision those things. And then hopefully on the weekend you can actually go see them for yourself. But that really is a technique that can be with you all the time. You can look at pretty pictures, just something that helps you go back to that natural world that God created. Yes. Okay, what else? What else helps with peace?
Yes. I love the route that you just like, I'm like, yes, that is so, I think about that person a lot. The person who is sitting at a desk or doesn't have the ability to go and see somewhere beautiful or be in that place.
Or doesn't live in California.
Yeah.
We're like, I mean, my husband and I always talk about, we're like, wait, some people live pretty places. But I just want to challenge you because like Texas, I mean, challenge whoever's listening, because Texas actually has gorgeous skies. Like I think everywhere has
Oh,
something
yeah.
that if you're
It's
looking, you
That's
can
so
appreciate
true. Yeah,
it.
and I think sometimes it could be hard to access.
Right.
I often think so. Being a very visual person, like and visual artist and stuff. As I'm creating, I think about specific people or places, and I see them in my mind as I'm creating. And oftentimes when I'm
Wow.
writing about taking a moment to breathe, I think about this moment that I had one time when I was in Wisconsin in like February. And this is like back in my music touring days. And we
Wow.
were playing in this, it was like a local ice hockey rink. And it was just like sleet and like really grimy ice
Yeah.
everywhere. Like it wasn't like pretty white snow. It was just like grimy, like I don't know how to explain it, but it was just gray ice
Yeah.
everywhere, inside and out. And a lot of times I'm like, I want to write for someone who's in a place like that. I even think I want to write for someone who's in a place like that and also in a hospital room, sitting in that uncomfortable chair next to the person that they love, that chair with that horrible fabric that's like practically plastic.
Yeah.
I'm writing with that person in mind. So even when I was writing my book, Pieces of Practice, I thought about that. I'm like, what are the practices that I have incorporated to remind me of these ways I can practice peace? So some of them I came up with are playing nature sounds. It seems
Right.
so small, but it can really make a difference. And I mean, you know this with your work. It's fascinating, like the associations that we can create
amazing.
just by
Yes.
hearing the sound of the ocean, just by hearing the rain in a rainforest. So to say, I've never been in a rainforest, but that sound, I mean, hopefully someday, but that sound of the rainforest, it just brings me so much calm. And I've even just found myself even just listening to that sound and saying, wow, thank you, God. Like, even though I'm not physically there myself, the fact that someone else got to be there
Right.
and take a moment, an hour to sit with a microphone in the rainforest and create this sound for me too, like that's a blessing. So I really like to think about those simple ways. I'm really passionate about those places.
Right. Those are so fantastic. I remember part of our story is that out of nowhere, I was put on hospital bed rest for 49 days, and I was pregnant with triplets, and we're in a very medically upsetting situation, for lack of a better term. And I said, what am I supposed to do? And they said, you're supposed to be calm. Okay, so just be calm and like lay here for 49 days. And of course, I didn't know how long it was going to be or how short.
Yeah.
And I had to figure out, like, I'm very hyperactive, obviously. Anyone watching this can tell. But how was I just going to be peaceful? Because it really is a command in scripture. It's not that, like, this is a nice idea if you would be peaceful in difficult times. I mean, truthfully, it's a command from God for Christians. We are supposed to live a peaceful life. And so I had to figure out, like, how am I going to be peaceful? This is not a peaceful situation. And it was really interesting because anytime I was peaceful, then the babies were too. And of course, anyone that's been pregnant before knows, like, how you feel definitely affects the kids. And so I had to make a playlist, and it wasn't of nature sounds, but it was of calming music and music that just, to me, it had no negative ties. There was nothing but just ease and comfort. So then fast forward to whenever they were like a year old, and I could not figure out how to calm 3 1-year-olds down. And I started playing, I found that old playlist. And because they had been trained in the womb to calm down when they heard that, because my heart rate was calm and I was at ease, a year later, outside the womb, 3 1-year-olds would calm down when they heard that same playlist. And I think, that's an unusual story, but it's true for all of us that we have those associations, and we can bring those good associations into our chaos, into hard times, into when we're in the pandemic and inside, or our world had changed, having those mechanisms that we know, which it could be different for different people. I'd love to hear your take on that. But having those just tools where we know, okay, this is what calms me down. This is what helps me, because in this world, right, we're going to have trouble. And so we have to know how we can calm down. And so I love that you speak to that. if I interview you and don't talk about your art, someone's going to be mad. Someone's going to message me, or I'm going to leave this and be like, why was I talking to her and didn't talk about the art? Oh my goodness. Okay. So that is, of course, how so many of us know you. For listeners and viewers, Morgan has amazing, beautiful art that really has like transported me before. I'll look at something that you've posted or something you've created, and it puts me in a different mindset. It encourages me. There's different ways that art really ministers to people, I believe. And so can you just explain to us, why is art important? Tell us your story. How did you get started really ministering to people through art? And then, of course, how God has blessed that.
Yes, yes. And thank you so much for, sharing your story as well. That was, wow, very encouraging. I came into art as a kid. My parents are artistic in their own right, very creative, and my parents are also ministers. So I grew up seeing that connection before me at a very young age. Like, I mean, it's like if you're a preacher's kid, you probably have similar stories to mine of just, seeing the behind the scenes of like, oh yeah, that big Christmas production? Well, yeah, we were painting that whole backdrop last night. Like,
Yeah.
so for me, it was always very much so. I saw painting, art, comedy, like my mom was totally a comedian. My dad's a musician. I saw all of those things integrated with how to connect with other people and how creativity is really can be a part and used to love on other people and
Right.
and share Christ's love with others through the arts. So I wouldn't have used that language, when I was 5 or 6, but
Right.
that's what I saw. And I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. And it was especially important for me because as a kid, I really, really struggled, and still struggle. Didn't know I was autistic, but I struggled with communication. I struggled with getting my point across in a fast way. I was the
Yeah,
kid
you
who,
would literally never know that listening to you. I just want to say that. Like, I
Well,
mean,
thanks.
truthfully, I mean, that's not at all what comes across. I just wanted to say, but
Well,
go ahead.
thank you.
Go ahead.
I've had a lot of practice,
Yeah.
because I was a kid who was regularly, I mean, just relentlessly made fun of for like
Oh.
missing out on sarcasm, on jokes. I was always late to the joke. I was just a little late on everything. So I ran into a lot of walls and barriers, especially when it came to connection and connecting with other people. And it was this conflict of like, in my heart, I want to connect, but I'm not always able to get the words out in time. I'm not always able to communicate as quickly or as, it's like, kids, they got lots of energy, So I was one of those old soul kids, like, okay, are we playing hide and go seek? Oh, they've already been playing for 30 minutes and I'm just now catching up to it. So I was running into this, and for me, creating art and writing stories became a way of creating connection when other people want to listen. And every now and then, I would run into another kid, usually it was an adult, who would be like, oh, I really like what you're drawing there. What's the story behind that? Oh, you could do something with that. And that became just a series of hints and clues of like, here's how you can connect with others and feel loved and seen yourself. And I think that was the message that I got at a young age by making things. So from there all the way, I was homeschooled, and that's an important part of the story for me, at least, because I don't know that I would have, and this is not, knocking on anyone else's experience.
Right.
It's just my experience.
We're interviewing you. Tell us your experience.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was such like a therapist way. I appreciate that. I mean that in the best way. That's a huge compliment. But yeah, for me, it was affirmed at home. Like, creativity is good.
Right.
Try things. And just from what I've heard from a lot of people in their school environment, they were told, no, don't do that. Like, that's just a hobby on the side. You need something more serious to focus on. So I would say that it was a huge blessing and a huge jumpstart in a way to that when I grew up, I still felt like I could do that. I still felt like, oh, there's things going on in the world that are important to me, such as tons of people my age struggling with mental health and struggling with the stigmas around that. Oh, art is a way that I can use to communicate how I care about that. So I had that for a long time, and to be honest, it hasn't gone away. The challenging part of it is that I did spend many years of my life trying to figure out, well, what's the version of this that's more socially acceptable, if you know what I mean. Like when I did notice being in college that, you know, when I'm walking around with my little fedora and like my little camera, like it wasn't as cool as when I was leading worship playing guitar. You know, that was more in the spotlight, more seen, more people saw me and paid attention to me when I was doing that. And, you know, when I was awkward Morgan in the camera, like I literally used to go to the computer lab in college and like, and print off, I couldn't afford color paper. So the prints were like, I think like 2 cents each for black and white. And I would like print out all my photos, black and white photos, you could barely see them on paper and like post them up in the dorm. Like, you know, you couldn't even see what the images were. So I started to see like, oh, that's not as cool. You know, it's more acceptable to do the thing that pushes you into the spotlight. So I actually spent 5 years as a full-time touring musician.
Wow.
And
I did not know that.
Yeah. And a lot of it was when I have a sister who is kind of more energetic out there, and I was doing that with her. And then, but the other part, it really was, is this the thing? Is this the version of what I feel like God has called me to do that's more socially acceptable, that's more likely to secure a job or secure opportunities? And it wasn't until about halfway through my 20s that I kind of returned back to the part that really spoke to me. And honestly, I felt like God was really speaking to me through making visual art and writing poetry. Like this might sound weird to people, but God speaks to me through color. Like it's just a thing. Like when I'm coloring and I'm painting in blues, like that's my time with God. Like it is a deeply sacred experience for me. And when I created more room for that in my life, like in my mid-20s, and I sat down and I wrote this poem about kind of the struggles that I was dealing with, feeling like I was not enough, feeling like I had failed, I had let people down, kind of through this whole music thing. That post ended up getting reshared on Pinterest over 100,000 times. And that's what launched into what I do today with visual art and poetry. So it was really fascinating, that journey, because I went, it was always kind of a baseline. I was like, I feel called to create, you know, my parents spoke that over me as a kid, and that was such an important part of my life and still is. But I did kind of go through this struggle and still struggle with all that. And then but it wasn't until I kind of returned to this, like, okay, even if it's the thing that you don't feel like is the most popular, the most interesting, you know, but to other people, you know, it's like God is speaking you to this in this place. So nurture that, stay with that, spend some time there. And even over the past few years with the collaborations that I've had, the opportunities I've had with my art in Target and Anthropology and all these places, I can look back at those and I can still see, even with those, I'm like, I didn't know that when I was drawing that, it was going to lead to Target, or I had no idea. It's like, in fact, if you told me, hey, this artwork that you're making is going to end up in Target, I would have made something totally different. It came from me, you know, just, they ended up picking things where I was just making that to help me find peace in that moment while I'm trying to be a parent of a toddler in a pandemic. You know, I made that for me. And as it turns out, that ends up connecting.
You made it for all of us, Morgan. So. We all needed help during that time. Well, I want to talk about something because I'm a pastor's daughter too. And so I'm glad that you referenced that. And you're talking about being obedient in your calling. And a lot of times, I think in Christian circles or culture, when we talk about obedience, we're talking about not sinning. We're like, you need to be obedient and stop, fill in the blank, or start, whatever.
Yeah.
But in the context of your story, when you're talking about being obedient, it really was it's just different. It was being obedient to your calling. It was stepping into that. That's a different way to think about obedience, because usually we think about it in the context of sin, and you're talking about it more in because you followed, I'm just guessing, the prompting of the Holy Spirit and listening to God, that helped you fulfill really what He had for you to do, which ended up being absolutely amazing. So can you just talk about that obedience journey, and just that's really a different conversation about obedience.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, in this context, I think about how if you're the kind of person who has spent time like hearing Bible stories or reading the Bible, one practice I like to encourage is like, what are the stories that really stand out to you? And I think there could be some clues or insight of like, oh wow, maybe that's reflected in my life some way.
Yeah.
That's why it's standing out to me. So one of those stories for me, like for whatever reason, was like Saul on the road to Damascus, and like Jesus is showing up like, hey, I need you right now, like change everything this very second. And that story always stood out to me so much. And I've thought about that a lot. Like, why did that story stand out to me so much? And for me in my life, it's like, because it was the immediate call. That's kind of scary. And I think that what I had to learn, in the frame of mind of just like saying yes, and, and just like, okay, I'm all in. It's just like, where in my life can I be more open to trusting like that knock on the door of like, hey, God's like, hey, it's like, I'm giving you like, and when I look back, like in those music days, when I look back, there were so many clues as to like, hey, you're like a whole visual artist, like do something with this. I was just designing, I was designing people's whole like t-shirt lines, like on the tour bus just for fun. I'm like, here's some concepts you could do. Here's your color palette, da, 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 da. Like I once sat next to them, like, yeah, I'm releasing a book, and I designed like their entire social media campaign in like 10 minutes. I was like, take these 4 colors, break them up this 4 ways, focus on this week, that week, that week. I was doing that all along, but I was kind of blinded by this overall, like, but you must do the thing that makes you more successful, or that more people are going to say wow to you, and all that, it's,
and that pays. I mean,
and that pays. Absolutely.
I mean, there's very much a practical side to being scared to do something artistic, or where there's not a clear path.
So I think it's kind of a question of looking at your life and saying like, where might God be trying to get my attention?
Right.
And I'm kind of scared to go down that route because I don't know where it's going to lead. And if that's too vague, think about those stories that, for you, it might be the story of Jonah, like, whatever it is, like, think about those stories where you're like, that story really stands out to me. There might be something in there that reflects, oh, maybe I'm kind of afraid of that, or maybe that's something I need to sit with.
That's so good. And tying it back to our earlier discussion, truly, when you're doing what God, I know you would agree, when you're doing what God has created you for, there's so much peace in that when you're living out your calling and how God's created you, and of course how He's leading you. We could talk forever. We are coming to a close. Other than Starbucks, Target, Anthropology, all the a million places that we can see your beautiful art, can you just tell our listeners and viewers how we can stay connected to you, to your ministry, and just to all that you're doing?
Yeah, so I am Morgan Harper Nichols pretty much everywhere. The Morgan Harper Nichols podcasts, Morgan Harper Nichols on Instagram, Pinterest, TikTok, YouTube, all the places. Just wherever your preferred place is, just look me up, Morgan Harper Nichols. So Yeah,
And
take
I
a
will
buddy.
say, if you are having a stressful day and you're like, I can't go out in nature right now, nope, but you can look at Morgan's Instagram. It brings just so much truth. It's so much beauty and so much truth and so
Thank
authentic. And so
you.
I just want to thank you for your artwork and being the light that a lot of us need and the encouragement. And I'm so glad that you chose being an artist over singing to bless so many of us. But thank you so much for being on the show. This was a great conversation and just
Thank you.
so encouraging.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Unapologetic. Remember that you can listen to today's episode and more wherever you get your podcasts and at ptv.org/Julia.